Your Majesty, a follow-up on the nature of the eye of the world, this turning of the wheel. What was, what will be, and what is may yet be spoiled by this report, which contains major spoilers through Season 1, Episode 8 of this turning of the wheel, and only world-building elements from the books which describe last turning. My clerks and I suspect the eye of the world is likely the Dark One's prison this turning of the wheel, thanks to careful analysis of information obtained since our first report. Current events have clarified without doubt that the eye of the world is within or near the fallen kingdom of Malkir. This allows us to focus on 2 of the 4 possible situations outlined in our last report on the eye. The predicted outcomes of scenarios that assumed the eye was located in or near Malkir have potentially both occurred. Rumors that the recent Aes Sedai expedition to the eye proved disastrous to all present indicates there was organizational failure on the part of the Aes Sedai to anticipate and mitigate risk. The battle at Tarwin's Gap, which was concurrent with the Aes Sedai expedition to the eye, was a southward attacking movement by the Dark from the eye toward Shinar. With both appearing to be true, we seem to be no closer to determining the other question from our last report on this matter, whether or not the eye is the Dark One's prison. However, my clerks recently discovered a manuscript whose author arguably has the highest known degree of knowledge about the world in this turning of the wheel, with a strong chance to prove one option over the other. A copy was moved from the White Tower's library to a collection in Andor, which shall remain unnamed through means I can neither confirm nor deny. I would expect the source to be highly credible. If any part of the source were to prove unreliable, a great many other things we have presumed as truth may need to be called into question. This manuscript clearly and unequivocally states that the eye is the Dark One's prison, seemingly settling the ongoing debate on the matter. The manuscript also supports our prior understanding that the blight spreads from the Dark One's prison, but in so doing it seems to sow the seeds of its own destruction, as noted by Joe of Takaran Riod in one of Nabliss's live streams. For full reference, please look to the bottom of the report for context in the conversation. Just because the host claims to be the Chief Forsaken doesn't mean their logic is unsound. Allow me to explain. Given the new, reliable information of Malkir's proximity to the eye, it seems impossible that the blight could spread from the eye, which is inside Malkir, to overwhelm Malkir from the outside 30 years ago. Therefore, one entry in the manuscript must be unreliable, casting serious doubt on all the others. All that said, my clerks did identify a possible situation where both of these could be true at once. The critical piece is where and how the blight spreads. The source of the vast blight can be relatively close to Tarwin's Gap, because the blight does not spread evenly from its source, whether or not it is the eye. This can be clearly seen as Rand looks in various directions from the eye. To the north, the blight goes on to the horizon. When approaching the eye from the south, the blight also reached the horizon, though possibly not as far as to the north. But to the east, toward the sunrise, coincidentally the direction he begins walking, the blight ends halfway into Rand's line of sight due to the Eye Waste. If anything, a presumption of near even spread of the blight strengthens the case for the eye. Further, the blight did not spread evenly last turning. Shaiol Ghul was closer to Shinar than Saldea, and yet the blight did not have to overwhelm Shinar to be present in Saldea. Here it is. If the eye of the world is just outside of Malkir, it can still be the Dark One's prison and the source of the blight that overwhelmed Malkir 30 years ago, because the blight did not have to spread southward into Malkir as far and as fast as it spread in the other directions. Consider, the 7 towers were tall, and people generally build tall structures due to a shortage of land. Between all the lakes, I hear there were 1,000 of them, and the nearby blight, Malkiri land would be at a premium, pushing new construction up, not out. Based on my clerk's calculations, the blight also grows relatively quickly. If the Aes Sedai expedition to the Eye traveled 20 miles, a reasonable estimate for a day's travel over rough terrain, that would mean that blight traveled 20 miles south in 30 years, or 2/3 of a mile per year. This is corroborated by an Aes Sedai's estimate that the blight, quote, was miles from the gap 3 years ago.
3 years ago, it was miles from Tarwin's Gap. It's just another sign that the Dark One's strength is building.
If we take miles to mean at least 2, as it usually does, then the blight is currently growing at a rate of 2 miles every 3 years, or 2/3 of a mile per year. But just because something is possible, or even plausible, does not mean it is likely. And here is where the credibility we ascribe to the manuscript comes into play. By the principle of Ozel's razor, the simpler explanation prevails. When a highly credible source says something unequivocally, and the contradicting sources are not of equal or greater credibility, the highly credible source's perspective is more likely. We view this manuscript as highly credible, and will continue until proven otherwise. For those who argue that the simplest explanation would be that this turning more closely mirrored last turning's geography, consider that one of the hills or mountains north of the Eye could easily be this turning's version of Shire Ghoul, and the two just happen to be adjacent this turning. This would align the geography of this turning closer to that of the last, reducing the amount of change. To be clear, I cannot understate that if this manuscript is unreliable, most fundamental assumptions we have made about this turning are thrown into question. Let's not dwell on that possibility, shall we? Your Majesty, this concludes our report. My ladies and lords of the Westlands, rulers from sundry lands, if you find the reports my clerks and I produce to be helpful, as you labor in the service of your people, do honor us with your raised thumbs and subscriptions. Until our next report.